Oh. Okay. Let's do my share screen. And let's do good evening. Is this? Let's see here. Okay, good evening, all. Tonight's shiur Le'ilui Nishmat Avimori Dov Ber Meir Ben Ruven Alevi Imirato Rachel Bat Harav Michal, and also Le'ilui Nishmat Myron Weintraub, Mayor Ben Shlomo, who passed away suddenly yesterday. Levaya was today. I hope his neshama should have an aliyah, and also Libada L'chaim a refuah shlema to Liz Kruger, Chanukah Bat Sarah Leah. Before I start, I have just an important announcement for those who are here tomorrow. Next week's shiur will not be Monday evening, will be Sunday evening instead. Same time. I have a simcha on Monday evening, so next week's shiur will be Sunday evening. I will hopefully make sure that gets announced around and send out reminders to people that that is the case. But I did want to start with that because I know I'll forget at the end. Okay, this week's parsha is parshat Tazria. One of the shorter parshot of the Torah. Usually during a non-leap year, it's read together with Parshat Tzaraas. They both share a same theme, which is Tzaraas, with the exception of the first 8 psukim of this week's parsha, we talk about the Tum'ah of Yoledet. We're not going to speak about Tum'ah of Yoledet or about Brit Milah this evening, but we're going to focus on Tzaraas. And you will notice that I try to avoid translating the word tzaraat. Unfortunately, many English translations use the word leprosy for this word, which is a well-documented malady that has absolutely nothing to do with tzaraat. The only thing they share in common is that they are related to their manifestations of symptoms are somewhat skin related, and light skin related. That is the only common denominator that they have. There are, I think it's Ma'am Lois brings down about 20 different ways of proving that these are not the same malady, primarily related to the halachot of tzaraat, which are and the treatment plan for tzaraat, which is definitely different than the treatment plan for leprosy, with one exception. I think perhaps that in some cases there is some type of quarantining of the patient, but we'll get to that, I hope, a little bit later. So I wanted to start before we get into the actual parsha, because I think the question that we have to relate to is if we're talking about some type of disease that has physical symptoms, and we have to try to understand, why is the Torah becoming a medical guide, or is the Torah becoming a medical guide? As a matter of fact, especially since this pretty much follows on the heels of the laws of kashrut, which also seem to be not necessarily something that we can comprehend from a physical perspective. By looking at, although there were those who wanted to say that the laws of kashrut are also related, health related, but they're not. The laws of kashrut, just like the laws of tzaraat, are very clearly in the chok category. Chok meaning that we can try to understand it to some level, but no matter what level we understand it, there will be a level of understanding of these mitzvot that will escape us completely and totally. So we're going to start with a very quick Gemara, a very short excerpt from the Gemara in Arachim, which tells us very simply, Amar Shmuel bar Nachmani, Amar Yochanan, or Shmuel bar Nachmani said, Yochanan is right at the top of your screen. Al Shivad Dvarim Nigaim Ba'im. The malady called tzaraat, which is also referred to as nigaim, because we'll see later on that one of the keywords we're going to run across is the word nega, which means I would translate it as a blemish, as a imperfection. They are caused, and here it's used in the plural nigaim. There are 7 reasons that nigaim ba'in, they come, they afflict the person. And they are al lashon hara. I guess perhaps the most well-known one is that tzaraat is related to lashon hara. based on the fact that the word mitzorah seems to be a sort of acronym of Motzi Shem Ra, which is basically simply another form of Lashon Hara. Between Lashon Hara and Motzi Shem Ra is that Lashon Hara is false by definition. Motzi Shem Ra is true. I take it back. Wait, Motzi Shem Ra is true by definition. Lashon Hara is true by definition. Motzi Shem Ra is false by definition. But they are both negative speech about somebody. And they said in one case it's the truth about somebody, but it's a very negative perspective of that person. And the other, it's a false statement that has been fabricated about this person to make them look bad. Okay, that's number one reason. Second reason, al shvichut damim, wanton spilling of blood, aka murder, taking of human life inappropriately. Al shvuot shav, a false oath or a vain oath. In other words, using God's name in an oath in either a false way or in a non-essential way. In other words, just swearing just for the sake of swearing to prove a point or to disprove a point when it was not necessary. Al gili arayot, illicit sexual relations. Al gasat haruach, haughtiness. Al gezel, thievery. Al tzarot ha'ayin, and stinginess. Okay, so those are the 7 reasons. Now, clearly, they're rather interesting litany and do not necessarily have anything in common other than perhaps a disregard for other people or a need to show that you're higher and mightier than other people. I think is one of the perhaps common links between some of these. It's either disrespect for other people's person or property, or a need to show that you are more important than they are. The Marsha tries to understand why specifically these 7 and why would we think that there should be 7 to begin with. He says, firstly, negaim b'lashon rabim, v'sheyesh zayin mine negaim b'katuv. As we go through this week's parsha, next week's parsha, we're going to find 7 different types of negaim described. And he lists them here what they are. There is the baheret, which is one type of white skin condition. There is the se'et, which is a slightly lesser degree of white skin condition. Each one has a lower degree of whiteness, but those are only counted as 2. Third is shtin ve'umichva. The type of michva is, again, a different type of skin condition that arises from a burn or a wound that the skin just gets discolored. Dalit is netek berosh, a head skin discoloration, obazakan, or either in your head or on your chin or your beard area. Harachat v'gabachat, baldness or patches in your above your on your head or your forehead. Vav is nigei begadim. 6th category is nagaim that strike garments, and the 7th is nigei batim, nagaim that strike houses. So I just wanted to start with that introduction to say that the reason that the Marsha wants to suggest the reason there are 7 different averot listed or 7 different conditions listed that could cause it, because there are 7 different types of tzaraat that he defines that are defined by the Mishnah and Negaim. Okay. Having said that, let's go. I'm sorry? Yeah, they're all connected in the fact. Oh, no, perhaps the Marsha seems to suggest that because each of these 7 conditions, 7 averot that are listed are not of the same severity. Clearly, there's a vast difference between, let's say, shvichut damim and geza and tzarot ayin. I mean, it's very different to take somebody's life than to take their possession. It's very different, taking God's name in an oath versus, let's say, being haughty. Although they're okay, so he's saying that the different severity of the sin might be the reason for each of the different severities, but he doesn't necessarily do a one-to-one correspondence. He only suggests that the reason there are 7 different types is because there's 7 different sins listed because there are 7 different types of nigaim. Okay, the common denominator they all have is they're all called nigaim. And one of the key ways of proving the fact that this is not leprosy is because you don't go to a doctor for a diagnosis or for treatment. The person you go to is your friendly neighborhood Kohen. By the way, the word Kohen appears in this week's parsha, which only has 65 psukim, including the 8 that aren't part of Tzaraas. There are only 57 psukim in this parsha that are dedicated to Tzaraas. The word HaKohen appears 54 times. The word HaKohanim appears once. 54 times. So it's almost an average of once a pasuk. The word HaKohen appears either as the person who is diagnosing the disease, the person who is declaring the treatment, or declaring the quarantine and taking care of the treatment. So we're going to see that very, very prominently, that in this week's parsha, there are a number of very, very prominent key motif words. Obviously, the first of those, one that appears the most time, is HaKohen. The second is nega, the word nega or negaim. Generally, it's nega or hanega, and it appears 46 times in this week's parsha. We're going to see, as I said, when you get to the next screen, you're going to see all the different colors. We've got nega in one color, we've got HaKohen in others. The third key word in this week's parsha is the root resh aleph hey, to see. Okay, so we're going to have the Kohen will see, and this is one of the most challenging parashot for Bali Kriya, because we're going to have the phrase Vira'ah HaKohen. The Kohen will see something, I think 13 or 14 different times, and 10 different cantillation sets, 10 different truck. So when you get to Vira'ah HaKohen or Vira'ah HaKohen, you the Baal Koreh, better hope you have somebody good on your side standing telling you, which notes is this, because you're going to forget and get them all mixed up. Having read this parsha, as I say many times, I can attest to the fact that you always forget which Vira'ah, okay, no matter how many times you looked it over, it's easy to forget which Vira'ah HaKohen you're up to, or Vira'ah HaKohen. Good evening, David.
Died. Sorry, and I've got to go now. I'm awfully sorry.
Oh.
You don't want to finish it off?
I can't.
David Salter, good evening, and can you please mute yourself?
Yes.
So you're ready to ask a question. Thank you. Okay. So, as I said, so the third key word is ra'ah, re'iyah, seeing, the Kohen seeing. We're going to have what says l'chol mar'eh ne'kohen v'ra'ah, or the v'nei mar'eh ha'nega, the appearance of the nega. We're going to have that coming. And the ones that are a little bit less, the word tzaraat appears only a mere 18 times in the parsha. And the word tameh and tahor, which appear together, or roots of those, appear a total of 23 times in the parsha. So those are the theme words, keywords, and we're going to see how they fit together to make a couple of points about this disease called Tzaraas. So let's start with the beginning of again, as I skipped the first 8 psukim of the parasha, which don't talk about this, we begin with Parak Yud Gimel, and that's what we're going to be talking about the whole time. So you'll notice in purple, Lenegat Tzaraat, Kohen or Kohanim is in green, Ra'ah or Mar'eh or Ra'ahu is in yellow, and you'll notice that I've highlighted in blue is Tameh or Tahor, and gray is colors. Colors play a very important part in this disease. The primary color that we're looking for is Lavan or Levana, white. Generally, these maladies that afflict the skin are basically your skin changes color to white, or at least not all of it, but a portion of it. Generally, at least according to the halacha as it's written, you need an area that is large enough to hold a square area that is 6 square pores by 6 square pores of skin, an area in which 36 hair follicles appear. That's the minimum size. So if you happen to be less than that, you can have all of the symptoms. But if it happens to be a narrow patch that's only 4 hairs width, and it can be as long as it wants, doesn't cover. It's not 36 square things. It's a minimum 6 in each direction. So that's one of the proofs that, again, we're not looking at this specific disease as a physical disease. It's a physical manifestation of a spiritual disease. 6, the amount of space in which 6 hair follicles grow. So it's basically 6 hair pores But again, the average skin, I don't know how close your hair pores, probably, I guess, 2 micrometers. I don't know. I have no idea. I didn't pull out my little measure and measure it, but it's basically, it's about a size of a thumbnail, I think, approximately 6 square, but it has to be 6. It's not 36 square. It's 6 by 6. So if it's, if it's 20 by 3, it doesn't count. Okay, that's one of the halachot of Tzaraas. Again, we notice, as I said, very, very prominently, this phrase of Vira'ah HaKohen. The Kohen has to see the nega. You, the layperson, cannot diagnose. You may think, oh, I think I got it. And by the way, when you are diagnosed with Tzaraas, you become Tameh. However, that does not happen until the Kohen says the word Tameh. You can have this disease, you can have this malady for whatever, until you choose to come to the Kohen. Okay, and the Kohen diagnoses you, or you're brought to the Kohen. It says here you can either come to the Kohen, because we'll have places where Ubayel HaKohen, but then we also have V'Ubayel HaKohen. He can be brought to the Kohen. But in any case, when he is brought, the Kohen has to see it. He has to see it, by the way, during daylight. He cannot see it under artificial light at nighttime. Even if you know you got it, you get to Yerushalayim and it's a minute past sunset, you got to wait till the next morning till you're going to get your diagnosis, because the Kohen cannot diagnose this at night, even though he knows you've got it. Even though he saw it during the day, he has to say Tameh. I take back. If he sees it during the day, I think he can diagnose it. He can declare it Tameh, but he has to see it during the day in daylight. Night is Shkia, sunset, I think. Yeah. Again, that as I said, that I'm not sure. I don't remember in terms of halacha whether the Kohen can. I don't remember, but I know he has to see it in daylight. It has to be daylight, and I think that's defined as sunrise to sunset. But I could be wrong. Okay. Again, as I said, the classic case of Tzaraas is the Kohen does not always know whether you're Tameh or not. He might have to quarantine you for a 7-day period. There are generally, if you have certain conditions, if you have, again, here in Pasuk Gimel, the Kohen sees you and he sees that the Mareh HaNega, he sees one type of nega where the nega appears to be sunken. So the skin, this white patch of skin that is, at least as I said, the minimum size, appears sunken and below the rest of the skin. That is a sign of Tzaraas. And then it says in Pasuk Gimel, so he immediately declares he's Tameh, and all of the things that apply to the person who has Tzaraas, which we're only going to see toward the end of the parsha, will apply to this person. However,
Aaron, he quarantines you for 7 days. Does that mean to say that it heals itself after 7 days?
No, wait a minute. No. I said there are cases where the quarantine will last for 7 days because of uncertainty. You have certain degree of tameh, but it's not a certain tameh. It's what is called, there are 2 types of tzaraat. One is called hester muchlat. You're certain it has tzaraat. The other is hester musgar. You are quarantined for 7 days to see what happens, whether this really is tzaraat or not. Okay? So if we look at, and there's both of those are described in the first 2 psukim in the parsha. Pasuk Gimel describes a case where the symptoms are such that it's clearly recognizable as Tzaraas, and the Kohen immediately declares it's Tameh. Again, if you look at the end of Pasuk Gimel, come on, mouse work. Vira'ahu HaKohen mitimei otos. The 4 words I've highlighted. The Kohen immediately will see him, and he will declare him Tameh. Again, until the Kohen says the word Tameh, he's not Tameh. Okay? Now, if it's a different type, if it's a Baheret, which is Levana, if it looks to be the skin is white, but it's at the same level, it doesn't appear sunken from the skin, and there's no white hair, it's just the skin has become white, then he quarantines this person who has this nega for 7 days. At the end of the 7 days, he's now going to examine Pasuk Hey, on the 7th day, he now sees it. If it hasn't changed, so it hasn't spread at all, then he takes he has to quarantine him for a second 7-day period. That's the longest. There's only one individual case where you get quarantined for 3 weeks. I think, if I'm not mistaken, that's by a beged. But general quarantine was either 1 week or 2 weeks. That doesn't mean, by the way, that you were guaranteed to be cured in the end of 1 or 2 weeks. This was only if you weren't sure if it was really tzaraat or not. Whereas if you were sure it was tzaraat, the timei oto, he's declared tamei until it goes away, which could be a day, it could be a month, it could be 10 years. Okay? The theory, again, the Gemara wants to try to understand that the reason we put you in quarantine is A, there's a punishment aspect, but B, more importantly, is the aspect, the reason you're being put in quarantine primarily is so you have a chance to get away from your daily routine and think about what you have done that has caused you to have this condition. That's the primary thought process of the Tzaraas, I guess, regimen, I'll call it, is to cause you, the person who has Tzaraas, to reflect and think about the fact that, hey, this is not a physical disease. It's a physical symptom of a spiritual disease. And you are supposed to reflect and hopefully do tshuva. As a matter of fact, the Gemara brings down the reason that we don't have these afflictions today is the Gemara says when these 7 sins that we just listed became so widespread and people ignored the warnings of Tzaraas and they were no longer effective as a God sending you a message saying, hey, get your act together, and people were just not paying attention, it no longer occurs. That's one of the rationales behind this thing. But why this whole disease? The reason we have to study it is because it's important for us to understand that the nature of this disease, and by extension, the nature of all disease, is God is sending us a message. Now, whether he's sending us to you, the individual is sick, he's sending us to society collectively, I don't know. We don't know. That's the problem. We don't always know what the message is that God is trying to get across to us. That's always the challenge, is understanding what is it that God is trying to get us to understand. Gershon, you have a question? Is there a question of how many recorded cases of Tzaraas there are? The answer, I haven't seen anything that tells us how many there were. I will tell you that we know in the Torah, there are 2 people who have Tzaraas in the Torah. Okay? Who are those 2 people? None other than Moshe and Miriam. Seems pretty strange, hey, wait, the 2 great. Moshe only gets it on his hand when he's going, remember, he's at the burning bush. God tells Moshe, you're going to do this. And what does Moshe say? He says, when God says the children of Israel will believe, and Moshe says, they're not going to believe me. I got to have a sign. And God says, what do you mean they're not going to believe you? So one of the commentators is why the second sign is that his hand turns tzaraat when he puts it in his inside his cloak or whatever. I guess it was his robe. He puts his hand in his robe and it comes out white, and then he puts it back in and it changes back to regular color. This is God hinting, hey, you just said something that you weren't supposed to say, at least according to those who say that and you notice number 1 reason that he brought down was Lashon Hara, that Moshe spoke Lashon Hara about Bnei Yisrael by saying they weren't going to believe him when he said God sent him. And God says, yes, they will believe him. Okay, so that's number 1. And of course, we know the story of Miriam and her Tzaraas. So those are the 2 people. Actually, there's a 3rd case of Nigaim where it says that Paro is smitten by Nigaim. He and his household when he takes Sarah, but that's a different question as to what. It doesn't say the word Tzaraat there. It just says Nega or Negaim. Okay, a goy can absolutely get Tzaraat. As a matter of fact, what we would read as the Haftorah if it were not Shabbos HaChodesh, is talking about a goy who had Tzaraat and who is cured. In the days of Elisha, the Navi, the Naaman, who is the Sar Tzava of Aram, has a bad case of Tzaraat. He is told to go to the Navi who will cure him. And the Navi does cure him. And that's the whole story of the Haftorah. And the Haftorah of next week's parsha, which again, next week we're going to read, is going to be Shabbat HaGadol, so we won't read it. But the Haftorah of Mitzorah also talks about 4 people who were Mitzoraim. And so we do have cases in the Navi where there are cases of tzaraat documented. Perhaps I don't know. To me, one of the most famous would be the Melech Uziyahu, who is stricken with tzaraat when he tries to enter the Kodesh Kodashim. Yotam, not Uzi, it was Yotam. Excuse me, wait, which king is it? Oh my gosh. Wait a minute. Yoash, excuse me, Yoash, who is stricken with tzaraat because he tries to go into the Kodesh Kodashim. So there are documented cases of tzaraat in Navi.
When the guy is in quarantine
Yes,
and then he gets started because he has stored it all out.
yes,
So
that's
the next time he goes to the Kohen.
the Kohen will see that he has now been cured. Again, you don't have the 7 days is two different things. The 7-day quarantine is somebody who is not certain. He has to wait the full 7 days. In other words, if you came to Kohen and he said, no, you got to wait 7 days, even if it goes away completely, you still have to wait the full 7 days. You go on the 7th day, you say, oh, here it is, it's gone. Okay, now you're tahor. Again, the Tum'ah and Tahara are dependent on the Kohen saying it, not on the physical condition going away. That is the theory. The healing comes from Hashem. Yes, obviously you see it, just like the malady comes from Hashem, the healing comes from Hashem. So I think if I were to reduce this Tazria to the Torah to one lesson that we have to learn is that when we are facing challenges, physically, whatever, we should be searching through what we could have possibly done that might be causing that. That's the ideal. Do we do it? No, we go to the doctor gives us medicine, and we say, okay, good, we're fine. But it's interesting because if you look at halakha, it's brought down that, by the way, when you go to the doctor, you're supposed to say a little tefillah that says, Hashem, I hope that you'll give the doctor the wisdom to heal me. When you take medicine, you say, Hashem, I hope that they prescribe the right medicine. I hope that you will help, that this will help heal me. Unfortunately, that doesn't happen too frequently because we've become lost in the fact that there's a medical profession. We know all about diseases, and we find out. I think one of the biggest lessons of the last 2 years is the more we know, the more we don't know. But this, as I said, this whole interchange between, again, the Kohen and the Tzarua is really, I think, an eye-opener. When you really get down and you look at it in depth, you get this idea that, okay, yes, there are physical symptoms, but it's clearly a something that is caused by something other than physical. The Kohen is simply there to diagnose. He has to see, he has to look, he has to know what he's looking for, and he diagnoses. That's it. If you go through all of this, it will be the Kohen sees, the Kohen declares him either tamei or tahor, or quarantine, because we don't know yet. Okay, so that's the three. I'm sorry.
Does the Kohen require a certain rank?
Does the Kohen have to have a certain rank? He has to have studied the laws of Tzaraas. In other words, he can't be I would assume the same thing, by the way, is probably true with most of the functioning of the Kohen. We think of a Kohen as the Kohen. Now, a Kohen who doesn't know how to do certain things has to learn, has to go to Kohen school. That's what Kohanim do. They go to Kohen school. Just like Levi, if they want to be in the choir, they got to go to the Levi school to know how to sing and what to sing, or a musical instrument to play. Or in the case of time in the Mishkan, they had to know how to. They had to go to schlepping school to make sure that they were carrying that they knew how to carry the weight of whatever they were carrying. I'm sorry, David Saw, did you have a question?
No, I said it's specialization. They specialize in their field.
Well, again, I don't know to what extent they specialize. I mean, again, if we think about in Moshe's time, there are all of 3 Kohanim available. So I'm sure they had to know everything. As Kohanim, as we get more and more Kohanim, I don't know that they had specialists in Tzaraat or not. But presumably each family, remember that Kohanim were divided into 24 Mishmarot. So each, the Kohanim in general didn't just live in Yerushalayim and go to the Beit HaMikdash 52 weeks of the year. They basically went probably approximately twice a year plus Chagim, because they only were on duty once every 24 weeks. And by the way, most families of Kohanim were divided not only into the family, but they were divided into subfamilies that served one day. So you as a Kohen were typically on duty one day out of that week. Granted, you were on reserve duty the whole rest of the week if they needed extra Kohanim, but your day, your primary day was one day out of 1 week every 24 weeks. Okay.
Aaron, just by the way, do you know who was the first Mishmar?
The first Mishmar was El Yashiv, I think.
It was the Maronites.
Oh, the Maronites were the first. Oh, that's when they came back with Ezra. Okay. Okay, Mr. Maron. Okay. Thank you. No. How do they get their money? Kohanim got paid completely differently. There again, Kohanim have 24 different types of remuneration that the Torah prescribes for Kohanim, what are called the Chavdalud Matnot Kehuna. Whether they work or not, again, certain Kohanim were not allowed to work. A Kohen who had a mum, who had some type of physical defect, a Kohen who is a lefty and can't learn how to pour blood with his right hand or take a kamitza with his right hand, is going to be doing some other typical duties. They, again, how much Kohanim get? They didn't get a salary. Kohanim did not get a salary. They got a portion of certain karbanot. They got a portion of truma. Okay, how much truma you got depends on what district you lived in, how good a Kohen you are to, or whether you people liked you or not, or you were a well-known Kohen, or you lived in a district where everybody was poor and nobody had fields. I don't know. Kohanim could be poor. Yeah, not every Kohen was rich. Some were very wealthy and some were not so wealthy.
Aaron.
Yes. David?
Yeah, you said that each time the Kohen must see before it's sorted out.
Yes.
If it's gone and there's nothing to see, how does the Kohen make a judgment?
How does the Kohen make? No. When he sees the skin has returned to normal. In other words, he knows I would presume that the Kohanim kept records of who had come. Although there's an opinion that says, by the way, there's a whole point where the vihiskiro, the word vihiskir ha-kohen, when the Kohen was examining a nega, there is one opinion, and I'm not sure it's halachically, that it says that he should enclose the nega. There's two interpretations. That one is that he literally took a piece of, I guess, of carbon of something and drew a line around it to see, and then you showed him, see, here's my space where the nega was, it's gone. Okay, that's one opinion. But that's what vihiskir is. The second vihiskir means that the person was shut away. So there were different interpretations of how did the Kohen know that the nega went away. Again, presumably because he knew, okay, you came with, you were the one who came with the nega on your upper right forearm, and I got to look on your upper right forearm. And if I don't see it, I don't see it. And if I do see it, I do see it. Okay. But again, as I say, you'll note, as I said, the word vira'ah, hu akwein vira'ah akwein, he has to see it. Okay, and he has to know where it's been and where it's gone. So whether they did this by marking the actual skin of the person, or they did it by keeping a notebook of people who've come here or not, I don't know. I don't know how frequently, how many cases they had. There's nowhere it was Gershon's question. How many cases? I don't know. I have no idea. Okay.
What about when buildings are affected?
Buildings is next week's parsha. Okay, but we can talk about that. I wasn't planning on talking about buildings.
Sorry. Okay.
No, it's okay.
Yeah.
Buildings are affected with Tzaraas. Basically, it has to be. It seems to me it has to be on a corner of a wall. It has to be X brick size. You have to. Basically the procedure is you wait 7 days. If it hasn't gone away, you then have to remove the bricks and replaster, and then you get another 7 days. And then if it comes back after that second, after you've replastered it, the whole house gets knocked down.
But what is the spiritual implication of that?
Oh, the spiritual implication. Okay. Again, you've skipped a level between the body and the house, there's the third level, the clothing. Okay, so we have garments and clothing can get tzara too. The Parshanim say that if we look at these three different levels, that theoretically your house gets stricken first. God says, okay, first we'll see, we'll just hit your house first. We'll see if you do tshuva then and get the message. If that doesn't work, well, we'll get close to you, we'll get to your clothes. And if that doesn't work, it's going to be on your body. So that's one commentary. Okay, one commentary. School of thought says that's the progression. The progression goes from your house to, it gets closer and closer to you to see how long it's going to take you to get the message. That's one opinion. There's another opinion, by the way, in next week's parsha, which as I said, I wasn't planning on getting to, but okay, that says that, by the way, getting a tzaraat in a house isn't always bad news, okay? Okay, exactly. Rashi brings down a midrash that says that, because it says the word it uses there is natati, is almost as if you're getting a gift that you got tzaraat in your house. Well, how is tzaraat a gift if they're going to knock your house down or you're going to knock the wall down? But there's one opinion that says that that there were cases of where there was a treasure hidden in the wall, and the only way you were going to find it was breaking down the wall. So Hashem sends tzaraat, so you don't have to break the whole house down to look for the treasure, which you weren't even looking for in the first place. So that's why it's characterized as a gift. As I said, like everything else, it cuts both ways, I guess. I don't know how many of us would mind, having to take a brick out of the wall if we knew that there was a huge treasure hidden behind it, right? But then again, sometimes, we sometimes have to realize that the greatest treasure is that the house is whole, and that's the greatest treasure. So that's one. That's I said. That's a couple of implications of tzaraat habayit. Okay. The other implication, the other implication of having tzaraat in a house is, I think, if you could go back to Lois's original question, is there a correlation between the 7 types of tzaraat and the 7 types of sins? I'm going to go back up to the top. One of the sins that was listed, and I got to find it here, and how was, it's interesting because it's the 7th in each case, is tzarut ha'ayin. Tzarut ha'ayin means, how do you translate that? I won't say greediness. It's more, yeah, maybe, I don't know, greediness, stinginess. You don't have a generous eye. You're kind of like, what's mine is mine and tough luck. Yeah. And you'll notice that, by the way, to go back closer, that's listed 7th, and Nigei Batim, the houses, is listed 7th. And one of the things that is brought down in terms of Nigei Batim, one of the reasons your house gets afflicted with tzaraat is because one of the requirements is before the Kohen comes to check the house. Okay, when you think you've got a tzaraat in your house, you come to the Kohen and say, I think there's a nega in my house, and he commands you, take everything out of the house. Because if he comes and finds a nega there, he declares everything in the house becomes tameh. So to save you from having to basically put all your stuff through a mikveh, and anything that's earthenware that can't go into mikveh has to be thrown out, to save you that hassle of doing that, you only have to take everything out and put it on your front lawn. Okay, so there's a midrash that says, oh, why is he punished by having to put everything on his front lawn? Because he never wanted to lend his things to other people. He was very stingy with his things. He always said, oh, I don't have it, or I don't want it. So he has to put everything out front to be on display. Okay, so that's another aspect of tzaraat habayit, according to one opinion. Okay, does that help, David?
Thank you very much.
Okay, Gershon, you have a common question. What happens to Kohen who becomes tameh? He becomes tameh, has to become tahor again, just like anybody else who becomes tameh. We have to understand, while he's tameh, he can't come into Beit HaMikdash, so he's not going to be, can he diagnose tzaraat while he's tameh? I don't know. That's a good question. That's your question. Oh, as a remuneration has nothing, remember, Kohen being remunerated by the people has nothing to do with his work. I take it back. There are 2 groups of remuneration, okay? There's remuneration that is associated with the week you're on duty or being in the Beit HaMikdash. Okay, those are karbanot, which are split in general, any of the portions that the Kohanim eat among the korbanot were generally split among the people who are on duty that week, not necessarily that day, but the people who are on duty that week split up the edible portions of the korbanot for that week in general. They also got a portion of the lechem hapanim, the weekly loaves that were 12 loaves that were brought on the shulchan. The mishmar split the people who are on duty that week and the people who are going to be on duty next week, because on Shabbos is when the shifts switch. Both shifts would split that week, and obviously the people who came on would split it the next week when they went off with the next group coming in. Bikurim, when people brought bikurim to the Beit HaMikdash, that went to the mishmar on duty. People who brought, mostly the stuff that was brought had to be brought to Yerushalayim, that was given to Kohanim, generally came to Beit HaMikdash, went to the people on duty that week. So in other words, if I wanted to bring a voluntary offering, I might choose to do it on the week when the Kohanim I knew, the family I knew, was on duty, rather than doing it, 3 weeks later or 3 weeks earlier. Okay, so I might wait. No. Remember, Bikurim were brought starting from Shavuot all the way through Sukkot. There were always delegations bringing Bikurim, because it depended on how far they were coming from and when their fruits ripened. Remember, Bikurim are brought when the fruits. No, Bikurim, you start from Shavuot and through Sukkot. You can bring them through Hanukkah, but you only recite a declaration through Sukkot. Okay, so you might bring, if you lived way up north and it took you, a longer time for your city's delegation to get there, you might, instead of bringing fresh fruit, your bikurim might have been raisins and dried figs and dried dates and whatever, as opposed to and oil, or you may have already had to press the olives so they wouldn't spoil, rather than bringing fresh olives or wine or whatever. Greg Gershon, do you have another question? Oh, no, compensation for those who weren't on duty that week. Again, remember, truma. Every person you had a crop of grain, you had to take a portion and give it to the Kohen. You didn't have to give it to any Kohen except the one you wanted to. That's called tovat hana'ah. The portion that you, the value you, the owner, have in this grain is you can choose which Kohen to give it to. So if your buddy is a Kohen, you give it to a Kohen. As a matter of fact, if your daughter married a Kohen, or you were your brother, your sister married a Kohen, you could say, I'll give it to him. Okay, my brother-in-law's a Kohen, so I could take my truma and give it to him if I liked him. If I didn't like him, I could pick another Kohen. Okay, so with truma, and again, there were other when you slaughtered an animal not as a korban, you lived up in the north and you decided you wanted to have meat that week, so you took you bought a cow or a lamb or a goat and you slaughtered it. Certain portions of that. This is the roa, one of the forearms, the lachayim, the cheekbone, the keva, and the stomach had to go to the Kohen. Yeah. You just wanted to do it again. You couldn't go to the supermarket and buy meat. You wanted to have a fleishik meal that day, so you slaughtered a lamb. You invited all your friends to come join you, and you split it up, but portion went to the Kohen. So these were also called matnot kuna. Those are called the matanot. Okay, when you have a firstborn son, a bechor, what do? You got to redeem him. You got to pay 5 silver coins. Who does that go to? The Kohen. Which Kohen? Take your pick. You get to choose your favorite Kohen and give it to him. No, any Kohen. Because again, it's not dependent on the Beit HaMikdash. As I said, the gifts that are dependent on the Beit HaMikdash generally were the Kohanim on duty. The gifts that were outside of the Beit HaMikdash were generally, you had the choice of which Kohen you wanted to give it to. Okay? Exactly. Well, again, the Kohanim, where they lived, I don't know. They could live anywhere they wanted. I mean, it depends. Again, just like you can live anywhere you want, they could live anywhere they wanted. Did they have to get to Yerushalayim 2 times a year and plus on Chagim? Yeah. Well, but again, they could have been married to somebody who inherited land. They could have had, they could have had they could have inherited land from their mother, who. Levium generally, Kohanim generally lived anywhere they wanted. There were certain cities that were known as cities of Kohanim, just like there were cities that were known as cities of Levium. Because when Joshua conquers Eretz Yisrael, there were 42 cities that are given to the Levium, 48 cities that are given to Levium to live in, scattered throughout the land, because the Levium did not get a portion. But again, they didn't have farms in those cities. Those were cities where they had houses. They didn't have farmland. They weren't, the Levium and Kohanim generally were not farmers, unless they happened to inherit it from, through a woman, or they married, their daughter married somebody, or their mother happened to have inherited land. Okay, it was from a different tribe. Okay.
So they could live in any portion. They could live in the Benjamin.
Yeah, they could live in the tribe, any tribes. Yeah, the Levium were split among the tribes. The Levitical cities were specifically allocated throughout all of the 12 tribes. Okay, not just in the center. Okay, and so the Kohanim could live in Levitical cities, or they could live elsewhere. Okay, depending on where they wanted to live. Anyway, any other questions, comments before we go?
Aaron,
Yes.
I'm sorry I missed the beginning, but did you say anything about where the period of separation differs, whether a boy or a girl is born?
No, I did not. We did not talk about that. I went directly to Tzaraas. Didn't talk about the whole Tumat Yoledet, the whole birth process, and did not speak about that. No. Okay, I wanted to go to the end, because it's interesting that the parshat describes a whole list of Tzaraas and doesn't tell you what happens to the person who gets it, other than that the Kohen declares him Tameh, or the Kohen says, no, he's no longer Tameh, he's now Tahor. By the way, I want to stop. I got myself one step ahead. One of the other proofs, if we needed another proof, that this is not a physical disease, is this pasuk here. If the Tzaraas covers the entire body, if all your skin turns white, then instead of being Tameh, you suddenly become Tahor. And then if, as it starts turning back, you become Tameh again. Which is a very counterintuitive, totally counterintuitive. Okay, again, people who have Tzaraas were generally removed. They could not live inside a walled city. They had to be outside of a walled city, because they could not live in a walled city. Other than that, there was generally no restriction, although there's a whole discussion in the Gemara as to whether they were allowed to be with their families or not. They were allowed to be with their wife or not. That's a whole discussion in the Gemara, and there are various different opinions on that. Did they? No, they did not have cities of lepers. Tzaraas, no, at least not to the best of my knowledge. As I say, no, they're supposed to be separate. That's the point. And that's what I wanted to get to at the end. At the end, after it's described a whole lot of different times, it finally tells us about the Tzarua. Let me see where I got to find this. It's toward the end here. After we go through all these different things. Here we go. Okay, pasuk mem hey. Okay. Now after we've already discussed, they said the different colors of the types of Tzaraas, who is Tahor, who is Tameh. And here, finally, toward the end, finally, right before it gets to discussing the laws of Tzaraas of garments, it tells us the following: Ish Tzaruahu, a person who is Tzarua is Tamehu. He is declared Tameh. Tameh Tamenu HaKohen. The only one who can declare him Tameh, as we said, is the Kohen. For Oshonigo here, this specific parsha is talking about a skin patch on the head. But again, the next psukim apply to all Tzaraas. Hatzarua asher bo hanega. Any tzarua, any person who has Tzaraas, who has this nega, bigadav yufrumim. First, he has to do kriyah on his garment, and he has to wear that kriyah garment the entire time he has Tzaraas. Okay, virosho yeh farua, and again, his hair should not be shaven. He does not. He has to sit. It's like he's in mourning in certain respects. And again, even the only thing he has to be, according to one opinion, he has to wear something over his head to cover his eyes from seeing other people. That he should be totally introspective. So the tamei yikra, and he has to go about saying tamei, warning people to stay away from me because I am tamei. Okay. Or kol yemei asher hanega bo, as long as the nega stays within him, yitma, he is tamei hu, and all of that time badad yeshev, he must dwell alone. He must be outside the camp. In other words, outside any walled city. He is not allowed to be in a walled city. He is not allowed to live in any walled structure, according to one opinion. He has to live outside in the open, and he has to be separate from everybody else while he is tameh. So that is, I think, where, again, people want to draw this, oh, he must be being quarantined because he's contagious. He's not contagious. That's the whole point. This quarantine is not a contagion. It's not a trying to minimize the disease and keep him. It's to force him to think about himself. Now, there's a midrash that says that one of the reasons that we put him in quarantine, in solitude, basically, is because one of the things that Lashon Hara causes is it causes friendships to break up, marriages to break up, people to distance from one another. Her punishment for causing other people to be distanced from one another is he has to be distanced from all of society until he starts to get the pain and suffering that he's causing other people through his Lashon Hara. That's according to the opinion that Lashon Hara is the primary cause of this malady. So again, all of those other, I will say, antisocial type behaviors of robbery, false swearing, haughtiness, all these other antisocial behaviors, pretty much the same thing applies. That in order to cure yourself of these antisocial behaviors, you got to see what you have to be removed from society so you understand what society, how important society is to you. That's one of the reasons brought down for the whole regimen. The other regimen, as I said, there are aspects of mourning because you have to really get past yourself and start thinking about the impact you have on others. And I think that's one of the primary things that I think got lost and why this malady doesn't happen, because it again, if it doesn't have the impact it's supposed to have, God says, why bother? Why am I bothering through it if people aren't getting the last message anyway? I think that may be the same thing with prophecy to an extent. Why do we no longer have prophets? Well, God sent all these prophets telling us, change your ways, get your act together. And we didn't. So God says, it doesn't work anyway. So why bother with it? Gershon, you had a comment. Oh, okay. Okay, so I think unfortunately, Lashon Hara has become very common. I think hafuch. I don't think it was. I think. Look, as I said, I don't know that it was whether it was common, uncommon, or not. The fact is that we today, unfortunately, live in an age where anybody and everybody, whether they are a person, whether they are a place, whether they are a thing, whether they are an institution, is fair game for anybody to say anything about. Whether it's true or false doesn't matter. And reputations and lives get destroyed. There's an old ditty that we all learned as kids, because we all grew up in crazy cultures that said sticks and stones may break my bones, but names may never hurt me. That's absolutely incorrect. Okay, some of the gravest hurts we get to our psyche happen through the use of, or abuse of words, whether it's as kids you're being tormented. Okay. It is the worst, and because we all, and we have people who, again, make a living by insulting, and that's their livelihood. Whether they are called gossip columnists, or they're called comedians, or they're called political commentators. I think I'd like to believe that. I'd love to believe that. I'd love to believe that people were. I'd like to believe that, and perhaps they were, and that's why, as I said, it did act as a deterrent, and then it was effective for a period of time. But again, I as I said, I unfortunately live in a time where this is rampant, and I think that's why if why when you study the book, the Chafetz Chaim's books of Lashmir HaLashon and I forgot the name of the other one. My brain is not working, but these are important works to study and to take to heart, because it is so easy to destroy people through the use of words, much easier than going and getting a gun and because nobody can shoot straight anyway. Okay. Again, it's a challenge. It's a challenge 24/7 that we many of us don't even think of as a challenge. We think of, oh, who cares? What difference does it make if everybody else is doing it? Okay. And it's unfortunately, as I said, it's the reality of the world we live in. I think it's a reflection of the world we live in that people abuse words on an ongoing basis. And as I said, and there are many professions that are even specifically built around, tearing people's reputations down and destroying people and destroying relationships. So there's no question that there are no shortage of powerful lessons to be learned from Tzaraas, from this week's parsha. And I pray that we'll learn some of them so that we can be zocheh someday to be zocheh to that, not that Hashem had to take the malady away because it didn't work, but that we won't have this malady because nobody will be doing any of the things that will cause it. So thank you all for joining. I hope anybody has any comments or questions. I just want to remind anybody who joined late that next week we're going to be meeting on Sunday evening, not Monday evening, because I have a simcha on Monday evening. So have a good week. Hope you all started your Pesach preparations, and take good care.
Thank you.